what's going on, guys? It's your boy Fight Critic. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. If you have a specific topic that you want me to talk about, please drop it into the comments section. If there's any content that you want me to look over and rebuttal, make sure to drop any links into the comment section. So I wanted to, put some sports content out there today. um, just because football season is right around the corner. The NFL has been doing its best to abide by coronavirus restrictions in order to make sure that they can start the NFL season. So I wanted to talk about my New York Football Giants, which has been my favorite football team uh, since 1998. So since I was about 6 years old at the time, I've been a Giants fan. And I wanted to talk about the upcoming 2020 season. Now, I've been paying very close attention to the Giants in recent years because we just haven't been good. We've had the worst record in the league dating back to 2018. We have, you know, predominantly ended up as being a team that is expected to get a top pick for the last couple of years. And, we've shown so much inconsistency with, our coaching. We've shown so many issues with the front office and the GM, and just us not doing what we need to do in order to produce onto the field. So I wanted to talk about, this upcoming team, everything that they've got going for them, and of course, the warning signals. Now, I'm going to break this off into three categories. You're looking at the good, the bad, the ugly. But I did want to throw in a fourth, and I want to talk about potential, because I don't want to have this video be solely one-sided to be negative. I do want to talk about things that could happen. Um, but I did want to kind of go into things in reverse, get the negative stuff out of the way, and then talk about all the positives and all the good that can happen with this team. So let's talk about the ugly. So the ugly situation with the New York Football Giants right now is we do not have a really good secondary. And I'm hoping that at some point, this kind of group of defensive backs can kind of show a lot of promise. But as of right now, I don't consider this team's defensive, scheme in the secondary to be as versatile as what most people, and I say people as hardcore New York Football Giants feel, is an upgrade in comparison to previous seasons. We don't have the viable cornerbacks that we had. I wasn't the biggest fan of DeAndre Baker, to be honest. I think our defensive line is pretty much at a standstill in terms of what we were last year and previous year compared to what we have now. Um, and I will say that, I still think we have a lot of concerns with the offensive line that we've had for the last couple of years. I also think that we have a very underrated, but group of wide receivers. But at the same time, we don't have a wide receiver that's like a top five receiver in the league, the way that we had with Odell Beckham. And of course, the biggest issue that we have is protecting the quarterback. And the real big ugly is we've had so many off-field situations happening from our kicker to DeAndre Baker, that it's made it really hard for us to kind of get a grasp on things. And it's also, stuff that's been thrown at the GM David Gettleman in terms of culture. You didn't have anybody that had off-the-field issues to this extreme, to where you got guys doing hit and runs and guys, subject to robbery and bribery. So because of all that, it's a big impediment on David Gettleman when it comes to the whole culture angle. And, kind of shifting into the bad really is our schedule. The Giants, in my opinion, I think if we could get to 6 wins, I think that's a win for us. In comparison to previous years, we just have a really hard schedule, and our division is a lot harder than it was last year. Philly's made upgrades. The Dallas Cowboys, they've always been a team that, as much as I hate them, you've seen consistency in what they try to do on the offensive side of the ball, and their defense has also been the type of defense that has a lot of young talent. And even, the Washington football team, which I'm trying really hard to like kind of get myself used to saying it, um, they got the guy that we wanted, because they finished ahead of us in terms of, being the biggest losers to end up in a draft. Um, so for us, the biggest issue that we have, in my opinion, is, our schedule, and how things kind of played out. Uh, the good that we have is we kind of know who our players are at this point. You know, Daniel Jones is who a lot of people consider to be the franchise quarterback. Um, Saquon Barkley is, in my opinion, I'm biased, is the best running back in the league. Um, and we had really good um, play out of Slayton last year, who kind of emerged as one of the better rookie wide receivers. Um, and for us, we kind of have like a young crop of guys to kind of figure things out. There's a lot of high expectations on Andrew Thomas, who's our first round draft pick. And we had a lot of expectations on Xavier McKinney, but he is currently injured. He's not going to be playing for a significant period of time. So there's a lot that we could do. There's also high expectations on James Bradbury, who we signed from Carolina. And of course, we brought in, a couple of different types of veterans. I'm not a big fan of the Blake Martinez signing personally, but I hope that Blake can use this opportunity now that he's not going to be a guy who's like a bench guy, kind of coming in for half the plays or 60 to 70% of the plays. He's going to be a guy that starts from day one. Um, so I'm going to be very modest, and I'm not going to be as negative as expected. And the potential for this team, if they can kind of put this together, could potentially be 8, 9 wins. Because that's kind of like if everything kind of checks off the board. And what I mean by that is if the O line shows consistency, if Daniel Jones is not the fumbling machine that he was last year, if Saquon Barkley can avoid having any sort of injury, in any sort of injury early on in the season, like what happened last season. And if our receivers can, be on the field, that includes Sterling Shepard and not having to deal with concussions, and our tight end Evan Ingram and not having issues with injuries, this team could very well win 8, 9 games. But the biggest part of this all is based on you need all those things to kind of check every single box off. And if this team doesn't perform well enough to do it, a lot of people are going to look at, well, what's going on with the coaching side? What's going on with the GM? And I'm just going to be flat out and very honest. I'm not one of these individuals who is going to give Joe Judge all the betterment, in terms of like all the free passes. If Joe Judge can bring in some stability to this team, then I'll be super happy about it. If he can show us that he's not the same prototypical Bill Belichick protege who doesn't perform when needed, I'll be really excited and I'll buy into this. The same way that it took me a year or two to buy into Coughlin when he was hired to be the Giants head coach. But if Joe Judge tries to use the same sort of game plan that Bill Belichick uses in terms of how he treats his players, because Bill Belichick isn't the guy who like looks at and has favorites for his players, or says things such as he doesn't like treat his players like evenly to the point that he just doesn't look at them as the same as players. But if he comes in and he has the same sort of attitude that Coughlin brought in the first couple of years that Coughlin was the head coach, then he's going to find himself in a situation where the players will turn against him, and I don't want to see that. And for us, the big thing for me, and the biggest thing for me, is the GM. I'm not a fan of Dave Gettleman, and we've watched the team cut a lot of people that he's drafted, especially this time around. I wasn't a big fan of him putting the amount of money on our books that we did in order to limit us in free agency the last 2 years. I'm not, super thrilled about the way that he's presented himself in terms of the media and the things that, he's said. And I want him to realize that, you came from a place where you took a team that had a structured organization and you threw a wrench in there when it came to Carolina, to the point that you were deemed the worst GM by the players. And it took Tom Coughlin royally screwing up Jacksonville to unseat you from that mantle. Um, So yeah, I have a lot of reason to be skeptical of Dave Gettleman. The Leonard Williams trade is the biggest thing that has like backfired on us the last 2 years. And if Leonard Williams can come out and be a Pro Bowler this year, I think that's the only thing that'll save Gettleman's job. If Leonard Williams does not work out, or if you can't even get him to sign onto a deal that is worth the expectation of performance that we're in, and if the team doesn't get better, if Jones is able to perform and deals with the same type of fumbling issues, and if we find ourselves back at the top of the draft, all that's going to be, at the end of the day for us is pretty much going to be us trying to figure things out. And I don't think we should be spending another year with Gettleman to do it. And I have issues with John Mara and the entire organization and the family right now because they refuse to listen, when things are going wrong. They believe that, they can find other people to scapegoat, and I don't like that. So I'm really hopeful that this team can kind of produce these results and can at least show that they're willing to be in the playoff hunt. Because if we find ourselves with the worst record in the league and we have the number one pick, what's wrong with us picking Trevor Lawrence out of Clemson? What can we lose by picking Trevor Lawrence out of Clemson if Daniel Jones doesn't show and that he's taking a step up from his year one? There's a lot of times that, a first round pick doesn't work out. But if you have the opportunity to draft a once in a generation type of talent like Trevor Lawrence, why not? Or why not, use that opportunity to get a trade where you can get multiple first round picks for that one pick. So that's kind of how I'm kind of looking at everything from a structural standpoint. And the biggest thing I can say right now, especially for a lot of people who are really, really big fans of David Gettleman, is this is year 3. There's no reason for us to be using the Jerry Reese excuse. Jerry Reese's guys are all but gone. There's only about 3 guys left on this roster that came from Reese's era. So everything that happens right now, you can't blame Jerry Reese for what happens this season. You can't blame Jerry Reese for the defense. You can't blame Jerry Reese for the salary cap. You can't blame Jerry Reese for drafting. Everything that happens as a result of this team right now is Dave Gettleman. So if this team doesn't perform well, you can't use Reese as an excuse. There is nothing here that is tied to Jerry Reese in a long-term move. You guys love Sterling Shepard. You guys hate Evan Ingram, and you want to move Evan Ingram because he hasn't been able to be healthy. But when it all comes down to it, there's not an active guy right now that is linked to Reese the way that a lot of things in the past were that you definitely put a magnifying glass under. And I know there's a lot of subconscious and covert racism behind it that I haven't addressed because Jerry Reese was a black GM that won 2 Super Bowls with his team. And people do their best each day to kind of bring out and kind of mask that. So I'm not going to touch too much on it. But there's nothing that you can do this season if this team doesn't perform well that you can link to Jerry Reese. And the reason why is if this team performs well this year, you can link it all to David Gettleman. But if they do poorly this year, I'm going to link it all to David Gettleman.